Hello and welcome, our dear listeners. Dreadful Zone is back. It's been far too long since we've delved into the chilling depths of horror, but tonight we return with something truly dark. Tonight we delve into the darkness behind Valentine's Day, a day meant for love but stained by terror. So grab your snacks, your coffee, or whatever keeps you grounded, because what I'm about to share will test your courage. And whatever you do, don't forget to breathe. Let's begin. I've been sitting on this story for a while, but it's one of those things that still gives me chills when I think about it. It's long, so grab a drink and settle in. This happened a few years ago when I was 21, living in Dallas, Texas, and working at a well-known coffee shop downtown. It's a story about how something that starts as a minor annoyance can spiral into full-blown terror. So, a little background. I had just moved in with my mom in Dallas after finishing community college. I landed a job at this popular coffee shop in a busy part of downtown. The place was always packed, regulars grabbing their morning lattes, business people on their laptops, and yeah, a fair share of homeless folks hanging around. But overall, I felt safe. There were always people around, and the foot traffic was heavy, even at night. It all started on a random Tuesday. I was on my break and decided to run to the drugstore across the street to grab a farewell card for a coworker who was leaving. As I was walking, I noticed this guy from the shop following me. He'd been sitting in the cafe all morning, nursing the same cup of coffee, not really doing anything. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was just heading the same way, but then he caught up to me. "Hey," he said, his voice low and kind of raspy. "You work at the coffee shop, right?" I nodded, trying to be polite but also keep walking. "You're really pretty," he said, falling into step beside me. "Can I get your number?" I froze for a second. This guy was older, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, and there was something off about him. His clothes were disheveled, and he had this intense stare that made my skin crawl. No thanks," I said, trying to sound firm but not rude. He didn't take the hint. "Come on, just one date. You'll like me, I promise." I kept walking, but he kept following, getting more persistent. Finally, I snapped. "Look, I'm not interested. Get lost, okay?" He stopped in his tracks, looking genuinely shocked, like no one had ever told him no before. I didn't stick around to see his reaction. I just booked it back to the coffee shop and laughed it off with my coworkers. "Some guy just asked for my number and wouldn't take no for an answer," I said, rolling my eyes. Little did I know, that was just the beginning. Stalking begins. The next day he was back. And the day after that. And the day after that. It didn't matter what time I was working, morning, afternoon, or evening, he'd show up and just sit there, staring at me. He never ordered anything, just sat in the corner with that same intense stare, watching me like I was some kind of exhibit. My coworkers noticed pretty quickly. They'd block his view or give me tasks in the back to keep me out of his line of sight, but no matter what, I could feel his eyes on me. It got to the point where I didn't feel safe walking to my car alone after my shifts. My coworkers started walking me out, which was sweet of them, but it also made me realize how serious this was getting. Things took a turn one day when he finally ordered something, a water. I rang him up, and when I handed him the cup, he said, "Thanks, Samantha." I froze. I hadn't told him my name. He must have overheard one of my coworkers saying it. "How do you know my name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He just smiled, this creepy, toothy grin, and said, "I know a lot about you." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just some harmless weirdo. This guy was dangerous. A few days later, I was in the bathroom during my shift when I heard the doorknob rattle. I froze, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no answer. When I opened the door, he was gone. Then there was the time he took a coffee order that wasn't his. A customer had left their drink on the counter, and he just grabbed it and walked out. My manager confronted him, warning him that if he caused any more trouble, he'd be banned. He nodded, all polite, but he kept coming back. And he kept watching me. The worst of it happened on Valentine's Day. We were doing a deep clean of the store after closing, and I went to the bathroom to grab some supplies. When I walked out, I saw him. He was standing outside, staring through the window, his hands pressed against the glass, and in one hand he was holding this red foam heart, the kind you'd see at a dollar store. I panicked. "James," I shouted for my coworker, who was in the back. James came running, and when he saw the guy, he grabbed his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he said, his voice steady but angry. The guy didn't move. He just stood there staring at me for what felt like an eternity. Finally, after 5 minutes, he turned and walked away. The next day, I wanted to file a police report, but my manager told me to wait. "He hasn't technically done anything illegal," he said, which made my blood boil. Luckily, one of my friends convinced me to call 911 anyway. The police were surprisingly supportive. They told me I should have reported him sooner and confirmed that his behavior could be considered harassment. They advised me to call 911 if he ever showed up again. After that, my manager must have banned him because he never came back to the coffee shop. Months later, I was downtown with some friends, just hanging out, when I saw him. He was across the street, standing in front of a store, staring right at me. I froze, my heart racing. "That's him," I whispered to my friends. They didn't hesitate. One of them grabbed my arm and pulled me into the nearest store, while the others kept an eye on him. We waited until he was gone before leaving. That was the last time I saw him. I quit the coffee shop not long after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment. Even now, years later, I still get nervous when I'm alone in public. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, checking windows, making sure no one's following me. The scariest part is that I never found out who he was or what he wanted. Was he just some lonely guy with a crush, or was he something worse? I'll never know. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget the way he looked at me through that window on Valentine's Day, holding that red foam heart. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't in the shadows. They're right in front of you, in broad daylight. This happened 2 days before Valentine's Day. And let me tell you, it's the kind of thing that makes you double-check your locks at night and sleep with the lights on. So here's the setup. I was working late at the office, like late. It was already 8 p.m. and I was the last one there. My boss had dumped a mountain of paperwork on me and I was just trying to power through it so I could enjoy Valentine's Day without stressing about deadlines. I don't even have a girlfriend, so it's not like I had big plans or anything, but hey, I figured I'd treat myself to some takeout and maybe binge watch a show or something. Anyway, I finally wrapped up and headed out. The walk home isn't bad, about 15 minutes, and I usually cut through the park to save time. But that night, for some reason, I decided to take the long way around. Maybe it was the eerie quiet of the park at night, or maybe it was just my gut telling me something was off. Either way, I stuck to the road. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought it was just some guy walking the same direction as me. No big deal, right? But the closer I got to the park, the more I realized he was keeping pace with me. I slowed down. He slowed down. I sped up. He sped up. My heart started pounding, but I tried to play it cool. Maybe he was just heading home too. Then he called out, "Hey, kid." I froze. His voice was deep, rough, and it cut through the silence like a knife. I didn't turn around right away. I mean, who does that? Maybe if I ignored him, he'd go away. But nope. "Hey, kid," he shouted again, louder this time, angrier. I turned around, and there he was. This massive guy, way bigger than me. I'm 6'1", but this dude had at least a couple of inches on me, and he was built like a linebacker. He was close, too, like way too close. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, and his eyes were bloodshot, like he'd been drinking all day. He had this thick accent, Eastern European maybe, and he slurred his words as he started talking. "You stay away from her, you understand me? You stay away from Nellie." I was confused. Who the hell was Nellie? I didn't know anyone by that name. I tried to explain. "Look, man, I think you've got the wrong guy. I don't know who you're talking about." But he wasn't having it. He stepped closer, his face twisted in anger. "Don't lie to me. I see you with her. You think I don't know? You think I'm stupid?" At this point, I was terrified. This guy was clearly drunk, aggressive, and not in the mood to listen to reason. I tried to back away, but he kept coming, his voice getting louder, more threatening. "You stay away from her or I'll make you regret it. You hear me? I'll make you regret it." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I turned and bolted. I could hear him behind me, shouting insults, calling me names, but I didn't look back. I just ran. My heart was pounding, my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stop until I was sure I'd lost him. When I finally got home, I collapsed on the couch, laughing nervously to myself. What the hell just happened? I didn't even have a girlfriend. I hadn't been on a date in months. Who was this Nellie he was talking about, and why did he think I was dating her? The next day, I left work early. No way was I risking another run-in with that guy. The walk home was uneventful, and I started to think maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe he was some drunk lunatic who'd mistaken me for someone else. But then I got home. There was a note taped to my door. My stomach dropped as I read it. "Stay away from Nellie. If you go on a date with her on Valentine's Day, I'll kill you." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. How did he know where I lived? Who was Nellie? And why was he so convinced I was dating her? I called the police right away. They took the note and asked me a bunch of questions, but there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd keep an eye out for the guy, but without a name or a clear description, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. I spent the next few days on edge. Every time I left the house, I felt like I was being watched. I avoided the park, took different routes home, and double-checked my locks every night. But I never saw the guy again. Valentine's Day came and went without incident. I stayed home, ordered pizza, and tried to forget about the whole thing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A few weeks later, I was scrolling through the local news when I saw it. A headline about a man who'd been arrested for stalking and harassing his ex-girlfriend. The article mentioned that the woman, whose name was Nellie, had filed a restraining order against him after he'd shown up at her workplace and threatened her new boyfriend. My blood ran cold. The article didn't give many details, but it mentioned that the guy had a history of violent behavior and had been deported from his home country for similar offenses. They didn't release his name, but I knew it had to be the same guy. I never found out what happened to him after that. The police never contacted me again, and I didn't push for answers. Part of me didn't want to know. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. How did he know where I lived? And why did he think I was dating Nellie? I never met her. I never even saw her. Unless he'd been watching me long before that night. And that's the thought that haunts me. The idea that this guy had been following me, studying me, waiting for the right moment to confront me. It makes me wonder what else he knew about me, what else he might have done. So yeah, Reddit, that's my creepy Valentine story. I don't walk home alone at night anymore, and I sure as hell don't take shortcuts through the park. And if I ever hear someone shout, "Hey kid," in the dark, you can bet I'll be running in the opposite direction. Stay safe out there, folks. You never know who or what might be watching. I never thought retirement would feel this. Empty. After 30 years on the force, you'd think I'd appreciate the quiet, but the stillness started to get to me. Maybe that's why I kept the old police scanner in my office, just to hear a little chatter, feel connected to the world I left behind. But on Valentine's Day, that damn thing changed everything. It crackled to life just past midnight, which was odd because the department had switched to encrypted radios years ago. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. "Help, please." The voice was faint, a whisper buried beneath static. "He's here and can't get out. Please, help me." I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd heard plenty of distress calls in my day, but this one, it was different. There was real fear in that voice, and it sounded like a young girl. I grabbed a notepad and scribbled down the address she stammered out. My old instincts kicking in. I knew the street. It was on the edge of town, near the woods where old houses sat forgotten. I should have called it in. Let the on-duty guys handle it. But something pulled at me. Maybe it was the desperation in her voice. Maybe it was the silence of my empty house. Whatever it was, I grabbed my coat and keys before I could think twice. The house was a 2-story colonial, paint peeling, windows shattered. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I stood in front of it, the wind biting through my coat as I wondered what the hell I was doing there. The logical part of me screamed to go back to my car, but that voice, it echoed in my head, pleading for help. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. It groaned as I pushed it open, the hinges protesting. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam slicing through the dust and darkness. The air was stale, thick with rot and mildew. Old furniture sat covered in sheets, cobwebs draping the corners like decorations. I took a step in, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. "Hello?" My voice came out more uncertain than I intended. "It's okay, I'm here to help." A faint noise drifted down the hallway. A soft, muffled sob. My heart quickened as I followed the sound, my grip tightening around the flashlight. The crying grew louder as I approached a door at the end of the hall. It was cracked open just enough to see darkness beyond. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. This felt wrong, everything about this felt wrong. But I couldn't walk away, not yet. I pushed the door open, and the sobbing stopped. The room was empty, save for a small, dusty bed against the wall. Faded posters of boy bands and cartoon characters were still taped to the peeling wallpaper. It was a kid's room. Then I saw it. A heart-shaped locket on the floor, gleaming in the flashlight's beam. I knelt down, picking it up gingerly. It was cold, far colder than it should have been. My fingers trembled as I clicked it open. Inside was a photo of a little girl, no older than 10. Her smile was bright, eyes wide with innocence. Behind the photo was an engraving. "To my Valentine, Emily." The air around me grew colder. My breath misted in front of me as a chill settled into my bones. I turned, and that's when I saw her. She stood in the doorway, her dress tattered and dirty, hair hanging limp over her face. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, neck twisted. But her eyes, they were wide, hollow, and locked on me. My voice caught in my throat. "Emily?" Her mouth opened, but it was wrong, stretched too far, too wide. The sound that came out wasn't human. It was a gurgling, raspy wail filled with pain and anger. The door slammed shut behind her, the force shaking the walls. I stumbled back, tripping over the bed as she moved toward me, limbs jerking like a broken marionette. Her fingers were twisted, nails blackened and sharp. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I scrambled to my feet, my back hitting the wall as she drew closer. Her face was inches from mine, and the smell of decay was suffocating. Her mouth moved, and this time words came out, garbled and wet. "Didn't help me." The room spun as flashes of memory flooded my mind. A missing persons report, a little girl who disappeared on Valentine's Day 5 years ago. Emily Langston. Her body was never found. Her case went cold. I'm sorry." My voice shook, tears blurring my vision. I didn't know." her face twisted, a look of agony and rage contorting her features. He took me. Her hand shot out, ice-cold fingers wrapping around my throat. Her grip was iron, crushing. My vision darkened as I fought to breathe, clawing at her hand. The flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor and rolling beneath the bed. As the light faded, so did she, her figure dissolving into shadow. The pressure on my neck vanished, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. When I looked up, the room was empty. The door hung open, swaying slightly. I stumbled to my feet, adrenaline propelling me out of that house and into the night. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, doors locked, engine roaring to life. I drove straight to the station, bursting in like a madman. I found old case files, dusty and forgotten, and there she was. Emily Langston, last seen on Valentine's Day. I remembered her parents, their tear-streaked faces pleading for answers I never found. My hand shook as I opened the file. There, clipped to the first page, was a photo of her, wearing that same heart-shaped locket. I looked down at my hand, the locket still cold in my palm. I dropped it, backing away as it clattered to the floor. It was impossible. That house, that girl, they found her body the next day, buried beneath the floorboards of that room. The man who owned the house was arrested. I quit listening to the scanner after that, but every Valentine's Day just past midnight, I hear her voice echoing in my mind. Help, please, he's here. I can never save her, and I don't think she'll ever let me forget that.